Okay. We're gonna try to start on time. Although we kind of failed with that already. Good evening. Welcome. You know, whether you're just starting with exploring the world of finances or money, or you've done really well with money and you're here tonight, I hope that in these last 3 weeks of us doing this, and this is the last night we're doing this, by the way, I hope these last 3 weeks you've learned something that you've just been able to grasp hold of that you find valuable. I know I've learned a ton of things. I think it was Mr. Warren Yutzi last week who said never stop learning. I'm sure you all heard that before. And one of the things that helped me to learn is to take notes. And I'm able to look back on my notes and go, wow, that's what they said. Because if I didn't take notes, I would have forgotten it all. Kind of like school, right? Anyway, so we've covered a wide range of topics from budgeting, investing, saving, Bitcoin. And by the way, if you actually would have invested in Bitcoin when Isaac gave his talk, you would have had probably a 20% return by now. 20% in 3 weeks is pretty good, right, Nathaniel?
It is.
That's pretty good. So, although it might be a little out there, and if you don't know anything about it, you probably shouldn't invest in it. But I just thought I'd point that out. Anyway, but being financially literate isn't just about numbers on a paper. It's not some big math equation, which being financially literate, being good with your money, is about being a good steward of what God has entrusted to you. It's about being obedient to God's word, and that's what's more important, so let's not lose sight of that. So, tonight we have our last 3 speakers, and these 3 people have actually shaped my view on money, at least to some degree, and I'm excited to hear what they have to share. So, Dan, you're up first.
Fantastic.
Hopefully that didn't
we'll just leave it now.
shut off.
Good evening, everybody. I'm super happy to see everybody here, and so let's just start with a quick word of prayer, and then we'll get going. Dear God, thank you for everything you've done for me personally, and thank you that for all the wisdom that you've given us in your word, and I pray that whatever we say and do here tonight would glorify you and help somebody who needs to little piece of wisdom tonight. I hope they would find it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so a little bit about me. My name is Daniel Henderson. This is my lovely wife, Ashley. She's super financially savvy, and I credit a lot of my financial success to her. That being said, so I started off, I was homeschooled. I had some ideas with money. My family liked a lot of like Dave Ramsey stuff and Crown Financial Ministries, and what they were like, no debt, save money, which was a really good foundation. Well, then you start to, I think it was like 19 or 20. I work as a farrier, so trimming and shoeing horses, and summer is usually your busy time, and so. I remember like working crazy hard one summer, and I started off my bank account was, I want to say it was like $5,000 or something like that, and just remember working my tail off all summer long, and I'm putting money away. But boy, like when you start actually working a real job and you're making good money, it's you're seeing numbers that you're not used to seeing in hit your bank account, and so then your wants start to get bigger, and so you're buying guns. I bought a boat. Like all these different things. Well, because I made this much in the week. Well, I should be able to afford at the end of the week. If I want that Glock, I'm just going to go buy it, right? Because that's seems fun. And then I remember getting to the end of the year, and it was like probably like September or October, and I remember just looking at my bank account because I wasn't really paying attention. It was like $5,000. It's like, drat. I worked that whole year, all the pain and suffering, sweat and toil, and blood, sweat, and tears. And I was like, stayed the same. That's not a fun place to be. And what was more is I spent all that time, that driving time, listening to country music. So my parents were like totally anti-country music, and so I was rebelling, and so I was listening to country music and drinking Mountain Dew. And my parents don't don't listen to country music, and they definitely don't drink Mountain Dew. So, but I remember sitting at the end of that year going, wait a second, I haven't gone anywhere financially. My knowledge level is the same or less than I started with at the beginning of the year. And so that experience forced me to go, wait a second, if I'm going to get ahead, I'm going to really need to start to understand what all these different things are. What is money? What is investing? What is all of these different aspects that, I mean, so many guys have talked about in the last 4 or 3 sessions. We've only made it to the first one, unfortunately. But, and then I'd highly recommend go back on and listen to some of the guys that presented on the YouTube. It's really good. So Ashley and I did that. But when I started looking at my life, I was like, well, where do I want to go in life? And life is a journey. And I was at a part of it where I'm standing still, and I just remember looking at Scripture, and God says, "If you need wisdom, ask of me." And I was really struck by that. So I remember just asking God for wisdom because, and I think somebody used it with Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett, for those of you who don't know, he's one of the richest men in America. He's incredibly wealthy, and I want to say he spends 8 hours a day reading, just gaining more knowledge, gaining more wisdom. And I thought, wait a second, if you took somebody like King Solomon, one of the wisest men to ever live, and let's just say you brought him back, boom, and let's give him a shirt, a pair of pants, some shoes, and stick him homeless in St. Cloud right now. How long do you think it would take Solomon to become a multimillionaire? He probably, let's say, give him 6 months to learn the language, because he probably didn't speak English. And then let's give him another couple of months to learn options or the stock market. I'm thinking by 2 years he's probably got $1 million or more. Why? Because he's using the wisdom that God gave him to better his lot in life. And when you look at Solomon, he made the nation of Israel incredibly wealthy, but him personally, he did not do that. He was using the wisdom that God gave him. Because remember, when Solomon is a young king, he's rolling in, and God appears to him in a dream and says, would you like wealth? Would you like a long life? Or would you like wisdom? And he says, well, wealth does me no good without wisdom, and a long life doesn't do me any good without wisdom, so I'm going to choose wisdom. And Solomon, through choosing wisdom, God says, I'm going to give you the other two. And God's wisdom, because if I was to say, okay, go buy Bitcoin, or if I say go invest in the S&P 500, or go invest in real estate, you can make money in all of those. You can, talking about guns, I like guns, and but I never made any money with my guns. I mean, it was maybe sold 1 or 2 and made a little bit, but I know a guy who I went to farrier school with, and he has a whole portfolio of collector-grade firearms from World War I and World War II that he has all over the United States. I mean, he has binders that are like that thick, just page after page after page after page of collector-grade weapons that he has sitting in all the museums around the country, and he's making $10-15 on each one of those every month, which is pretty cool, He turned that into a really great investment. So there's a couple of verses that I really, really like. I think the first one that certain people, I remember reading through the Bible or listening to the Bible, and Ecclesiastes was always a terrible book. It's just so depressing, and it's not fun to read, and it's miserable, and all its nothingness. Just a terrible, seemingly terrible book. But one of my favorite verses in the whole scriptures is found there, and it's Ecclesiastes 4:13, and it says, "Better is a poor and wise child than an old foolish king who will no longer be admonished." Do we have any poor children here? Do any of you feel like poor? You're far better than a king who's super wealthy, has a wealth of a nation at his disposal, but he doesn't want to. He doesn't think he needs to be told anything. He can't learn. Then you go through all the rest of Solomon's writings, and I love Solomon as a character in the Bible. And all throughout Proverbs, he says, "Seek wisdom, seek wisdom, seek wisdom." In Proverbs 16:16, it says, "How much better is it to get wisdom than gold, and getting understanding rather than choice silver." Seek wisdom. One thing that I did right away when I is I started listening to audiobooks on everything under the sun, on the Russian Empire and on economics and on science and different things, and started teaching myself and learning different things. And that knowledge part and that wisdom part comes first before the action, because you don't know what actions to take unless you have that wisdom to take that action. You could see a fabulous deal and you have no idea. But then having that wisdom to know, if I buy this piece of real estate for 30 grand, put 10 grand of work into it, now I have a property that's worth 150 grand. Like, those deals happen, but it takes that knowledge and that wisdom and that eye to see it. So then, going all the way through this, one of the things that struck me about money, because I'm saving money now, because I'm like, I shouldn't be just spending. I want to, get married someday, and I want to have a family, and I shouldn't just, spend it on guns and Mountain Dew. And so, I'm saving currency, right? And then I realized, wait a second, inflation is eating into my big wad of cash that I have now sitting in the bank. And so then I dove into, and you'll hear, grumpy old guys usually that are talking about, the Federal Reserve and blah, blah, blah. And so I was curious, and so I dove into that and read every book I could find on the Federal Reserve System. And it makes you mad, and it makes you frustrated. But more than mad and frustrated, I wanted to learn how to live and how to work in this system. I can't change the system. I'm just a little guy. But I want to figure out how to guide myself and my wife now through this turbulent time. If you imagine your life, maybe it would be better if I said, if I think of my grandpa, when he was my age, he lived through world wars. He lived through maybe 15 wars that the United States was directly involved in. He lived through 20, 30 depression cycles. He was born before the Great Depression, lived through the Great Depression. All of these different things. And so if your life and your goal, you can plot it out and you go, okay, well, I want to be here in the next 5 years and here in the next 10 years, here in the next 15 years, all of a sudden, if you're like, great, we're going to buy real estate. We buy real estate. Now the market crashes, and now what you purchased and what you owe a boatload of money on is now worth half. That's a scary place to be. So that's where going back and going, okay, what wisdom can I find and what fundamental ideas can I look at? And so I didn't have a ton of time tonight, and so I'm just going to touch on one of these. And this is the idea of what is money. Okay, so what is this right here? Is this money? We're all talking about money. Are we saving money? Are we investing money? What is this? Can anybody tell me what this is?
Dollar bill.
It's a dollar bill, yeah. Right on here it says, a Federal Reserve note. So the Federal Reserve must have something to do with it because they wrote me a note. But what is money? Money is only, think of money as a bucket. It's a bucket for value. The value of your life, your liberty, your creative powers, right? If you write a book and everybody likes it, well, now all of a sudden that's an asset that's paying you a bunch of money. And where did you get that? Well, you just thought it up. That's where you can turn your knowledge into money. But this is the United States currency, right? Currency is purposefully made to be a very poor store of value. There's a small army of people that are stealing that value because, let's take my example. Let's say you're like, sweet, we'll take a bunch of this currency and we'll stuff it under a mattress. It'll be safe there, You take that, let's say you save $100. That's great, fantastic. And then you go to spend it in 5 years and you go, wait a second, it only buys what $20 would have 5 years ago. That's a scary place to be. When I was in my 23, 24, 25, I did a bunch of stuff down in Honduras and with mission work and stuff like that. And the Honduran Lempira would go, sometimes it would be like 20 Lempira to $1, and sometimes it would be 50 Lempira to $1. And you're trying to help people. We're working in an orphanage and doing a bunch of stuff with that, and you're like, the poverty is crushing. But how do you get ahead if your paycheck, the paycheck that you have today, if you don't spend it, it'll only buy it'll buy a fraction of those goods in the future. That's a scary place to be. And so I got a couple of YouTube videos here. I'm very dyslexic, and so I love watching YouTube. And so there's a series called Hidden Secrets of Money, and he's a gold guy. He likes gold and silver, and he likes cryptos. But I don't necessarily want you to get hung up on gold and silver. That's not what I'm talking about today. That happens to be can be a good store of value. But understanding the system, understanding the game is where I want you to get to tonight. So here, we'll see if we can pull this up. Noah, can you help me out? This is let's
Take a few seconds.
I highly recommend this series in particular. He does a really good job of explaining what currency is. Now, what you do with that, obviously he's a gold and silver guy. He wants to sell you gold and silver. And so understand that, but understand the system. And it's a little bit simplified, but I think he does a really good job of explaining it. So let's get some popcorn and watch a little bit of a movie. Oh, hang on. We need some volume. Volume helps.
Welcome to Egypt. This is where it all began. Roughly 5,000 years ago,
the Egyptians started using gold and silver as their predominant form of currency. But it was not yet money. The pieces of gold and silver that they were using were odd sizes and weights, odd purities, so it still was not interchangeable, where each unit is the same as the next. This meant that nothing really had a price yet. You couldn't put a price of so many coins on something because they didn't have coins yet. Trade was still difficult. It was still a guessing game when it came to the exchange of values. One of the reasons that we are in the financial mess that we are today globally is that people do not understand the difference between currency and money. Currency is a medium of exchange, a unit of account. It is portable, durable, divisible, and something called fungible. Fungible means that each unit is the same as the next unit. A dollar in my pocket buys the same amount as a dollar in your pocket. Money is all of those things plus a store of value over a long period of time. Even financial planners, bankers, your accountant, they don't understand the difference between currency and money. The currency in your pocket is a medium of exchange. It's a unit of account because it's got numbers on it. It's somewhat durable, it's portable, it's divisible in that you can make change, and it's fungible. A dollar in my pocket buys the same amount as a dollar in your pocket. But because governments can print more and more and more of it and dilute the currency supply, it's continually transferring wealth out of your pocket, out of your bank account, to the government and to the banking system. The reason that gold and silver are the optimum form of money is because of their properties. It's an easy medium of exchange because gold and silver store a large amount of value in a very small area. It's a unit of account. Pure gold has the same value all over the planet. So an ounce of gold buys the same amount here in Egypt as it would in China or in the United States. It's durable. The same gold that Egyptians were using in trade 5,000 years ago is still here with us today. It does not corrode. It's divisible. You can make change with it. It's very portable. You could use something like oil as money. It's just that you can't carry around a barrel of oil on your back. It's fungible. Pure gold is the same wherever it is on Earth. Pure silver is the same wherever it is on Earth. It's limited in quantity. That's the reason that it maintains its purchasing power. Governments cannot print it.
All right. So he goes on and talks a lot more about a store of value. And after looking into this, I got really fascinated with mining, and I was like, okay, so how much gold is there, and how do you get it out? And so at Leeds, South Dakota, there's a giant gold mine, and think of a mountain in reverse. It's just this giant hole in the dirt. And they were like, this is fantastic ore. This is top-notch ore. And have you guys ever seen those little ore carts? They're like a tiny train car. They said for this tiny train car, we dig it out of the dirt, we move it all around, we smelt it, we refine it, and we get about a chocolate chip of gold for this big gigantic ore cart. And all of that work and that value is represented in that gold. Now, gold there's nothing necessarily special about it. It's really hard to get. The government, with our currency, they can print it out of nothing, out of thin air. Who in here has ever grown a garden? Okay. How hard is it to grow a garden? You got to weed it, you got to water it, you got to do all these different things. Well, imagine if the government could create a garden and say, here, we have this and we can make it out of nothing. Well, now a head of lettuce would now have no value or less value because the government can create it out of nothing. It's the same thing with currency, is that that value is being stolen by the government. Now, that's the difference between, in my opinion, currency and money. And understanding that is really interesting, and it helps you understand a lot more of how the financial system works. But then this is where it gets really can be frightening, but it's also scary and entertaining at the same time, is how the banking and the financial system works. And hang on. So after watching this, I had a client who worked for 30 years in the banking system. She was vice president at Bremer Bank, and she and so I was like, hey, is this the way the system actually runs? And she was like, yep, that's exactly how it runs, which is also frustrating. So this is how currency, this is how the currency in your wallet or your bank, this is how it gets made. Oh, hang on. We need volume here too, right? All right.
Trees. But the truth is that they say that money doesn't grow on trees. But the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest. But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, when you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money. The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up. Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, hey, thanks for that. And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created called bank credit in its place. Now I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now there is $190 in existence. Now, the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1. that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely a symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed, and there is nothing else. But if you thought that was crazy, get ready to enter the twilight zone of modern economics. We work for some of that currency supply. True wealth is your time, but we trade away moments of our lives, hour by hour, day by day, and year by year, for numbers that somebody printed on pieces of paper or just typed into a computer. Now those numbers represent our blood, sweat, tears, labor, ideas, and talent. We are what gives the currency its value.
So, that. Thank you, Chris. Hello, Chris, again.
There you
Perfect. Thank you. So, when the Bible says, don't spend your life working for money, that might be a little bit of what it's talking about. The government can print money just like that, and it takes us a long time. Now, I kind of want to wrap this up with what is our goal in life? I have a client, they're both incredibly wealthy. They have won the financial game. He was a mayor. He built a giant law firm. His wife was a dentist. She had a dozen dentists working for her, and they just built a beautiful brand new house on Lake Superior, and their lives are empty. They have 2 kids that live on the East Coast. They say they'll never probably have any grandkids, and their impact on the world dies with them. They don't have God, they have no hope. But if you look at some of the people around you that are older, that have followed God's design for life, the impact that they have and the fullness of the life that they have has impacted all of us in a great way. And so I just want to leave you with this final thought. And it's at the end of, it's in Matthew 16:26, and it says, "For whatsoever it profiteth a man, if he gaineth the whole world, but he loses his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" So if you're here tonight and you don't know where your soul is going, that would be a really good thing to look at. Maybe talk to your parents, talk to myself or Ashley or Chris or Noah. They can help point you in the right direction. But also think about life is not just to be lived, to drive fancy cars and to have cool boats and to enjoy. It's there to be lived in service of others and in service to God. And some of the richest people I know have no money or no assets of any kind, but they're storing their treasure in heaven. And instead of storing our value in, Federal Reserve notes that the government can print into an oblivion, we should be storing our value in God's kingdom. And there's a bunch of ways to do that. Spending your time doing God's work. That's what a lot of the Bible is about. But then, giving money, giving things like that. But living your life in a way that pleases God and is thinking of eternity, that is the true place to build and hold wealth. It's not in Bitcoin, it's not in gold and silver, it's not in the stock market. It's in heaven and in eternity. And if living your life with eternity in mind is far better than a gigantic bank account. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris and Noah. And if you have any questions about anything on here, you can talk to me later.
Thank you so much, Dan. Our next speaker is Isaiah Malstead. I think he has a lot of wisdom, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say. Isaiah, you have 20-ish minutes. You can go a little longer if you need to.
Okay. Thank you, Dan, for sharing. I've been looking forward to yours for quite a while. My name is Isaiah Malstead. I grew up over in Cokato, and I definitely don't have everything figured out, and didn't necessarily feel qualified to stand up here and present. But as I thought about it and prayed about it, there were a few things that came to mind, especially in light of, as Noah and Chris were talking about, in light of things I wished I knew when I was younger. And so I'll step back to when I was younger. I grew up homeschooled, worked for my dad. He owned his own cleaning and restoration business. At a pretty young age, got to start working with Dad, working with Grandpa and my older brother in the business. Had a lot of memories, learned a lot of things from working with them through that. At a certain point when you're 16, 17, 18, living at home, working pretty much full time, you start to notice in my case, the currency, the $100 bills piling up in an envelope, and you start to go, I should probably do something with that. Ended up, my older brother had bought a commercial building that had a couple of apartments in it. And so I was kind of intrigued by that idea. Saw a house come up for sale, bought it, worked on it for a couple years in my spare time and turned it and sold it for a profit. Now it was interesting because looking back, I didn't realize it at the time, but right there was one of the first lessons God was teaching me that looking back on it now I can see. Because I tried reinvesting into other houses, put in offers on multiple other houses with one of my brothers, and none of the offers got accepted, but ended up getting this opportunity to go study business underneath people who were running successful businesses, doing it really well. So I got to join a coaching program, travel around the United States to different events, and spend a lot of time with business owners and learn from them, from what they were saying, but also just watching what they were doing. And there's a lot of life lessons I learned from that, and a lot of things that have been helpful in life to this point. You want to help? This is my son Rowan. My daughter Sabrina is in the back, and my wife Christy. So today I want to talk about three main things. There's going to be three false beliefs that I held at one point in time. There will be three truths that God taught me through the process of walking through those false beliefs. And then hopefully an application we can pull from each one of them. At least an application I took to my life. Hopefully it's helpful for you. If this helps you guys at all, I'm a big picture guy. But I know a lot of people here are like, okay, but get to the point. Like, how does that apply to my everyday life? So hopefully I can get to that point too. False belief number one, wealth is a pie. I don't know if you've ever heard this concept in full or part, but this idea that there's only so much value, there's only so much wealth in the world, and if I get wealthy, that means everybody else by default will have a little bit less. And it's interesting how pervasive that is in culture. But I want to give an illustration here. Picture that you take a man, give him a backpack with some survival gear, drop him in the middle of the wilderness, and leave him for a year. When you come back, you'll probably find one of three things. Option one is he died, and that's kind of sad. Option number two is he's survived. He's curled up in his backpack. He's got his survival blanket wrapped around him. He's shivered. He's survived off of pulling berries off the bushes next to him, but he's still there. The third option is you could show back up, and he survived. He built a fire. He found a water source. He built a better shelter. And you show back up, and he's got this neat little shelter built here. He's got his garden started over there. He's got his smokehouse there where he smoked the animals he was able to trap, or the elk he shot with the bow he built. You could find someone, when you dropped him off with basically nothing, suddenly have something that if you saw it listed on Facebook Marketplace, you'd be tempted to buy it and go move there. Now, he did not steal that value from anyone else. He didn't slice himself a bigger piece of the pie at the expense of everyone else. He went and he took the creative ability God gave him to take the resources around him and make something that was worth more, something of greater value than what was there before. So the truth in that is wealth isn't divided. Wealth is created. When God made man, he made him in his image. And the first thing, I find this so interesting, the first thing that God tells us about God is that he's a creator, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he turned around, he made man and woman in his image, in his likeness, with godlike attributes, and told them to go, to be fruitful, to multiply in the earth. So to bring this a little more practical, this is a quote I got from a guy named Myron Golden. He says, "Income is the result of value created and offered in the marketplace." Income is the result of value created and offered in the marketplace. People will pay you money when they value the thing you're offering them more than the money they have in their pocket. Unless we're talking about a Robin Hood scenario or something where you're forcibly suddenly making them realize that they don't value that stuff in their pocket quite as much. But if we're talking in a legal, ethical, moral sense, that's how we make money. So to apply that, I want to whiteboard a little bit here and show you a concept that I'll say is probably one of the top 3 to 5 things I've learned in life that has shifted the way I think, shifted the way I view the world, and has been incredibly helpful. So, anyone have their Bible with them? If you do, you can turn to Genesis. In Genesis 1. In Genesis 1:26, it says, "And God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air,'" all that stuff. "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." And God blesses them. Now, this is kind of the first big act of creation. Obviously, we have the rest of the world before, but in the creating of man, we see 4 elements that come into play. And the way I've heard it taught, this is the four building blocks we need to create anything of value. So the first thing we need, actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's go in reverse order. Starting at the top, it says that God said, "Let us make man in our image." So before he could make man, there had to be an image he was making him like. He didn't create man separate from an image. He created man in the image of God. And so imagination is one of the building blocks that is needed. Imagination or vision could be another way to say it. It says, "And God said." So there's a communicating aspect to this creation. There's communication. It says, "And God said, 'Let us make man in our image.'" There's a unity within God, but God was unified as one when he created man. Anytime you make something, there needs to be unification. And that second verse, I think it was verse 27, it says, "And so God made man." And that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the dreams, the visions become reality. In the creation of anything of value, there needs to be implementation. So there we have implementation, unification, communication, and imagination. Now, something I find fascinating is that It's not fully spelled out right there in Genesis like hey, here's the 4 things, go and do it anytime you do something. It's more kind of hidden in the text. But later, if you go on and you read in Genesis 11 at the Tower of Babel, it's fascinating because God sees what they're doing, he goes down, and he mentions all 4 of these things. He says that because this people is united, they have one language, they've got one tongue, and they're working this work that they're building, that they're going to do. Because of that, they've got that unification and communication because of their language, because they're united under this thing that they've imagined. And they're doing it, they're doing the work. God himself said that nothing that they've imagined will be held back from them that they have begun to do. But it's interesting in that he doesn't just send a lightning bolt from heaven to bust the tower apart, but that he goes down and he removes their communication. Once he removed their communication, their unity was gone, the implementation was gone, and the vision that they had imagined against God, not with God, not submitted to God, now no longer could happen. And the people scattered and did what he had told them to do, which was to fill the earth, to multiply, and so on and so forth. Now, to bring this practical, whenever we go out and start looking for a job as a young guy, or when we start thinking about life skills and things we can build, we all know we can do a job like, hey, I could go to McDonald's and flip hamburgers. You're working as an implementer. You can, just show up, go to work, someone tells you, hey, here's what you need to do, and you say, yes, sir, and you go about and do it. And you can make a good living doing that, and that's important, and we need it. The thing is, there's an income cap on that. If you're working flipping burgers at McDonald's, you'll probably make minimum wage. If you're a diesel mechanic or a mechanic at, say, Rolls-Royce, you'll make a fair bit more money. But working as an implementer, you're using a resource, which is your muscles. And your muscles are a finite resource. You're using your muscles over time. And you can only do so much in a day. Before too long, you've reached your cap, and that's all you can do. So if you go into a career where all you're going to do is the implementation, I see I missed part of implementation there. You're going to cap out at, say, 100 grand, 150 grand a year, max, if you pick the right career field. If you become a plumber, if you become an electrician, a trade, like has been talked about other nights, or you pick something specialized. Unification. Now we're talking, you showed up, you did a good job, and the big boss at McDonald's shows up and he goes, hey, you've got promise, you've got leadership potential. I'm going to make you a manager. Now at this point, you're not using your muscles so much anymore as you're using your management or your leadership skills. You're using your management or your leadership skills to unite and to unify the people who are implementing. You could have 100 people all pulling on a big rock and pulling in different directions. You're not going to get it anywhere. But if you've got the guy who all of a sudden steps up and goes, all right, pull on 3, 1, 2. Suddenly you have a unifier. You have someone who's uniting the work of all sorts of different people into one direction. Now the thing is, if you're just in unification and you're not communicating anything, like you don't know what's happening here, that's a little harder to do. You need to have something, a vision to unite people around. So I'm going to talk about these two kind of in conjunction because oftentimes they show up that way. Communication, you're using your mouth to convey a message. You're using your mouth. That's the resource that you have. Now here you might be looking at, it could be upper level management in a company. It could be a totally different career field. You could be in sales. You could be going door to door. You could be used car salesman. At this point, you have a lot of potential to make more money because it's not just reliant on how much you can get done in a day with the muscles you've got, but you're able to communicate things and you have a much higher potential for income in this sphere. This would be where like movie stars, really good artists, musicians are in communication. They're taking a message from their heart and they're communicating it to someone else's heart. Imagination, has two resources that fall under it. Under imagination, you're using your mind. And your mind to make money. So here you're using muscles to make money. Unification, management skills to make money. Communication, you're using your mouth to make money. Imagination, if you're working in this level of value, you're using your mind and money, yours or other people's, to make money. Those are the 4 levels of value that that are required for any idea to happen and to come to fruition. There are 4 levels. You could work in all 4 of them. You could take an idea. You could do everything yourself. But now you're just limited on the implementation side of things. You could imagine the coolest skyscraper in the world. You could go through and communicate it to yourself, get yourself all psyched up, unified on it, and go to work yourself, but you're not going to get very far. This is where it requires other people. And this is the amazing part about it, when we touch on what Dan talked at the end, of investing into things that are eternal. By default, if you're picking a higher spot here, you're going there. But this is something that, in some ways, I wish I would have known when I was younger, and yet it was something that just took living through life to learn. In that, I used to work for a construction company. I was an implementer. I was out on the gutter crew. I was hanging seamless gutters. And there was a certain hourly wage I had, a certain amount of drive time we had every day that partly was paid, partly wasn't. And so within the number of hours I had in a week, there was a certain amount of money that I knew this is all that I can make in this job. Unification, I didn't really get to in that company. I did a little bit, but I ended up doing sales there, which, interestingly enough, sales actually brings in imagination too. So in sales, I was able to come in, I would walk to someone's house, they would have called up and said, hey, I've got a roof that's leaking. And I'd be able to drive out to their house, meet the customer, talk to them, get to know them a little bit, hear about what they really cared about. Like, is this something where they're trying to take this house and turn it into like their beautiful dream house? Is this something where, hey, I just want a functional roof to keep it dry. I don't have a lot of extra money right now. So as a sales guy, I could use my imagination to go, okay, here's a plan that I know can be installed that lines up with their goals. I could go back to our company, communicate that to the guys, communicate that plan, that install plan back to the customer, make sure everybody was on the same page with that vision was all unified. Everybody's like, yep, this is the kind of roof we're putting on, this is the shingles, this is the price point. And then sometimes I still got to go out and help swing a hammer. But oftentimes then this is where we had crews of guys who were working hourly, who were using their muscles to go and to put the roof on. Different skills. Here you start more physical labor. Here you go a lot more mental, right? Different parts of the people God created us to be. So that's the 4 levels of value. There's a lot more that could be gone, but I'm trying to keep it pretty short. Hopefully that's a good introduction to that idea, though. I want to dive into next false belief number 2. So false belief number 1 was wealth is a pie. Then we talked about instead when we're created in the image of God, he gave us that ability to create more value, not just slice what was there. False belief number 2 is that time is money. Time is money. But I want you to picture something. Chris, if you ran out of money, what would you do? Go get a job and make more money. If you ran out of time, what would you do?
Spend more money.
No, like if you're out of time, right?
I would ask myself, what am I doing with the time I currently have?
No, but like let's say you like physically, literally run out of time. That means you keel over, you die, and you're facing the one who made you, right? So time is a non-renewable resource. Once tonight is gone, it's not coming back. There's another one tomorrow night, but that's another night closer, hopefully, Lord willing, but that's another night closer to the end of the time that each one of us has been given. So at one point in my life, I realized looking back, I would spend a lot of time to save a little money, or a lot of time to not have to spend a little money. But The truth is, time is infinitely more valuable than money. Because money is a renewable resource. Time is not. So to apply that, what I believe or what I've found in my own life is I need to be willing to grow, to step out of being able to just go and swing and do the good hard work. But I need to be willing to grow mentally, grow emotionally to a point where I can be building something of value that I'm able to use to leverage the time that God has given me. That could be equipment, that could be better systems, better routines. But we can find ways, we ought to find ways to use leverage and grow in our ability to not just use our time and trade our time for little bits of money. The third false belief that I want to touch on tonight is that the most important investment you can make as a young person might be different than what you've been taught. At one point in my life, I'd sat through a couple different financial classes, and it was hammered pretty hard. All the cool math was shown of, hey, like if you just put this amount of money into a 401k or a Roth IRA, the market will return at average 10%, and at 65 you'll be a multimillionaire. Hooray! And there's nothing wrong with that, and that's good, and that is good math. And for some people, that's amazing. However, I would like to make the case that that is not the most important investment you can make as a young person. You see, because all of this, when we're talking income, when we're talking money, when we're talking the stuff that God has given us, or when we're looking ahead and saying, hey, there's certain things I want to have in the future. Before we can have something, we need to be able to do the thing that's required to get the thing. But in order to do that thing, you have to become the kind of person who can consistently do that, who can consistently operate in a way that will produce that end result. And so I'm sure you've all heard stories or illustrations of, someone who won the lottery, won it big, or had just the right business idea at just the right time, and had multi-millions of dollars, and suddenly a year later they're broke. They didn't know how to manage it. They didn't have the skill set or the mindset or the knowledge required. They weren't the kind of person that they needed to be in order to hold that thing that they had. And I'm convinced that oftentimes in life, that's why God doesn't give us the thing we ask for right when we ask for it, is because we see this vision of something cool, something we want to shoot for, but we're not yet the person we need to be in order to have that and still not implode. I believe that God cares about us enough that he's willing to bring us, he gives us that vision, something we're shooting for, something we're aiming for. But then he has us walk through the becoming the person we have to be, to do the thing we have to do in order to have that result. So I would make the case that the best investment you could make is investing into the person that you're becoming. Whatever that looks like for you, because God's going to tell you different than he's going to tell you, different than he's going to tell you who he wants you to become. For me, that looked like most of the money that I made from flipping a house and doing it pretty profitably went into missions trips, went into a business coaching program, went into travel, went into investing into things in other countries. And it shaped the person that I am today. And I've thought about it sometimes in some of the tighter financial times, walking through early marriage, walking through being an implementer, a guy in a gutter crew. Man, that, 5 figures I had sitting in a bank account would be kind of nice right now if it would have gone into another house, gone into a rental property, gone into something that was making me more money. And so I've asked myself the question, if I could go back and change that, would I? Like, would I not go on those trips? Would I not invest into that coaching program? Would I instead invest into a house? And each time the answer has been, I wouldn't change any of that. Because it's the people we meet, it's the books we read, it's the experiences, the life experiences we have. that shape and mold and form us more and more like Christ, more and more into the image of the person God created us to be. And so my biggest challenge to any young person in this room who's trying to figure out on a financial side of things, how do I be a good steward of what God's given me? Here's a couple practical things if you're trying to go, hey, what career should I get into? At least consider this. Weigh it, see if it's got merit in your eyes. That, you could pick different career paths that would operate in different levels of value that just the market automatically sends more money to. But more than that, I want to challenge you to ask God to give you direction, to give you clarity, to give you vision. But more than that, just to give you a next step. And I would challenge you that, especially in the area of using money, using this tangible, physical store and exchange of value unit that we have. But even more than that, in using your time, something that's not renewable. Don't be afraid to invest it into things that a financial guru would maybe go, I don't know if that's a wise investment, as long as you know it's the thing God's calling you to do. If God's calling you to do something, whether it be with your time, with your direction of life, where you're going, with the money you have sitting in your bank account, be willing to go all in, whatever that looks like, and not care what anyone else in the world thinks. Because at the end of the day, the time is going to run out. We're going to stand before the one who created us in his image and who loved us enough to give his life for us and who desires to walk through life with us in whatever he calls us to. We're going to stand before him, and his opinion is the only one that matters. And in that day, I know that none of us will regret a single decision we made, investment-wise, whether that's time or money, if we did it as much as we knew at that time, investing into, Father, I believe this is what you put in front of me to do, and I want to do it heartily with all my might, working as unto you and not men. Thank you.
That view on time was powerful, Isaiah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. May God stamp eternity on all of our eyes, actually. Reminds me of Psalm 1, where it says, blessed is the man who walks on the counsel of the godly. And it talks about later, his leaf shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Walking uprightly is more important than God's line of prosperity. Thank you so much. This is my employer, Alex Evable. I'm not going to call him my boss. Yeah, I think he has a lot of wisdom about money too, and I'm excited to hear what he has to share.
Yeah. Thanks, Noah. Thanks for having me tonight. Is it actually doing anything?
Yeah, it's recording.
Oh, I was like, yeah, I didn't hear that. All right. Okay. So, yeah, I don't do this. I don't. Little about me. I live between Clearwater and Annandale, kind of out by Noah. I own 3 different companies. Little, I guess, tidbit. I guess on the table there, I was encouraged to do an autobiography earlier this year. So on the table, there's folders and also koozies and sunglasses. So you guys all help yourself to that. But so I printed those off, and you can have at that. But that will speak a little bit more on each of my companies. But today, basically, we're talking about finances on my rental side of the business. So I have 3 children. My wife and I have been married going on 10 years here next year. 3 kids, 7, 5, and 15 months. It's a whirlwind of life. And running that and trying to manage that with, we also homeschool our 3 children as well, mainly my wife. But so going with that, I have kind of a few different steps. So I wanted to talk about my number one rule and how I got to that point. So my number one rule is keeping God first, right? I feel like we're all basically on the same page of that, but at the core of every business decision, I committed prioritizing God first, right? That's always kind of my first core. I made a commitment to God when I went on my own. It took me years to finally decide that I wanted to go on my own and actually venture into the world of entrepreneurship, I guess I would say. So before taking any step, I begin with prayer, right? Whatever it is, I will do a business decision and I go on my own will and I want to do it. Well, it usually doesn't go well. And sometimes I'm a sinner, just like everyone else, but I skip that step sometimes. And my wife will talk about a step before I went on my own. Had a business deal I wanted to do in Delano. And guess what I just said? I said I wanted to do. Well, guess what I did? I did not listen to what I was supposed to do. I didn't pray about it. That was before I decided what I was going to do and understand that. So getting into that a little bit, 1 Peter 1:13 through 15 always comes back to me. That's kind of my go-to. And it says, therefore, preparing your minds for action, be sober-minded and set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So what are we doing first? We're preparing our minds for action. That was my first commitment that I made to God, that when I went on my own, I would read 2 chapters of the Bible every morning. That was my like, here's in the line. I'm drawing that in the sand. As obedient, and this verse didn't come to me at that time. This wasn't like, oh, here's my verse and I'm going with that. This literally in the last year and a half was like, wow. It just clicked, you know. So as obedient children, do not be conformed to passions of your former ignorance. Well, there I was ignorant. I wanted to do this deal. Guess what? I wanted to do this deal. I was ignorant to that. So that was a commitment to God that I made, that I finally was at peace of going on my own and doing and jumping into that. So seeking His guidance for every decision that I do make. Now, in business, it's hard. It's not like I can just sit at my computer and all of a sudden I'm like, well, am I going to take this service call? Well, that's difficult. And in business, it's tough. So on the bottom here, so I don't know if you can see, so ASC Properties is basically what we're talking about tonight. That is my wife and I's rental company. We own long-term rental companies or properties. Also, Solutions Plumbing and Mechanical. Noah's one of our plumbing and heating installers there. And then also Cap Custom Homes. We build custom homes basically throughout the Annandale, Clearwater area. With that, I feel like we have a very good core group of employees throughout that. Between each of the companies, we're all in the same shop. Kristen, my office manager, she basically helps me through all three. It's a very much family atmosphere, and we're all on the same page, which I very much enjoy. And soon, David's coming on. So, going into this, ASE, how I do deals. I've laid this out here. Does anybody have rental properties? Long-term, short-term? Long-term? Long-term? Okay. So how I came to this, right? The point of this is what I wish I would have known earlier on. It took me a while to get to this point. And I was mentored by my father-in-law's good friend of his. My father-in-law passed away in 2016. We just started a business together. We dug our first house, and he had a heart attack and passed away. At that point, he kind of took me under his wing and kind of like mentored me through it all, and I was very grateful for that. And He owns 400 plus long-term rental properties, and that's kind of his gig. So and like he said, you can do it however many different ways that works for you in your financial ways. But for myself, this works well. Line of credits. Go to a bank, get a line of credit, create that, and there's multiple different assets or ways of doing a line of credit, right? A personal line of credit, business line of credit, or a home equity line of credit. You might have equity in your home, $200,000 of equity. You could take that, refi that out, and make that into that would be a HELOC, and use that to buy an investment property to eliminate you having to take that tangible asset out of your pocket. A line of credit gives you access to cash for quick purchases. That's been a powerful tool for myself. When I have that asset there, when something goes on the market and I know it's a sweet deal, I can swoop in and purchase it cash very quickly. Sellers love cash offers because they can close faster, especially depending on contingencies. Being in the plumbing and heating and construction world and also investment, I don't need just being knowledgeable in that. You know what to look for. So I don't, I generally, personally, my deals, I don't have contingent offers by any means. If I'm going to go there and I know it's a good deal and I've prayed about it and my wife agrees because it is also part of it, we have to be on the same page, off we go. Put in the offer and see what happens. Purchasing the property using a line of credit. So identifying properties and knowing your market. For myself, I don't feel comfortable coming down to Litchfield and purchasing a investment property because I don't know the market. That's me. I kind of hold a little bit tighter. I also have in our rental properties kind of a loop that I've kind of created from Clearwater. We have rental properties in St. Augusta and down the 94 corridor towards the cities, Clearwater, Monticello, Albertville, and then circle back around. From there, you have the 55 corridor. And we split over to St. Michael, or we're already there in Albertville, St. Michael, Hanover, Buffalo, Maple Lake, Annandale, Kimball. That kind of creates that loop. For myself, it is also time is money. And when we need to do a service call on something, well, we can do that loop. So knowing your market. And that's what I mean by that. I know what's in my backyard. I know that market. I don't know Litchfield market. I could look at something in Litchfield and, oh, wow, that's $60,000 cheaper than what I buy in Clearwater. Well, that doesn't mean it's a good deal. So understanding and knowing that. So purchasing a property using a line of credit, you can negotiate better terms such as pricing discounts, faster closings, acceptance of other offers, being competitive with that. You could target distressed properties, foreclosures, motivated sellers. I'm going to save that. I had another thing, but so with a line of credit, I guess maybe I don't know if I explained that enough with a line of credit, what a line of credit is, but it is the bank. It is you basically getting a short-term loan from the bank, saying that your net worth, your equity, you have this asset that you can put on the line to then pay it back. Usually they're a 1 year, 2 year, 60-day, 3-year notes. With that, so renovating, so I created this as an optional. If the property needs work, using additional funds from your line or credit can use that towards that. So let's say you had a $200,000 line of credit, which we're going to get to an example, and you purchased a property for $130,000. You take $20,000 out of that. You have this deal done at $150,000 that you've now done, and you haven't touched an extra $50,000 that you have sitting there. there's different terms that you can make on a line of credit as far as interest rates. And that's where we're going to get into a little bit later in relationships of banking. So that's where you can use your line for more than what just a purchase of that. It's basically cash. It's writing a check. Refinancing that. So now once we've had that, once you've purchased that property, you've got it put together, now you can refi it out into a 30-year mortgage. Right now it's actually making sense. So now you're going from a note, a line of credit, which is an interest-only payment, to now you're paying down on your principal. With that, a lot of times, even the appraised values, when you're buying something cash, you're not buying it with, getting an appraisal, making sure it's this, because you're going back to knowing your market. You're knowing what it already appraises at, because you already know what it should be at, right? You know comparables. You've seen it. So when you're going to refi this back out, the bank will issue a mortgage based on the appraised value. So it appraises at, I want to skip to the end slide so bad. I have an example of that. So you know how the long-term mortgage works at a lower fixed interest rate. So a lot of times your note might be an 8% payback loan, which your average mortgage rate now is 6%. So that is going to better you, and it's also paying it down on your principal, not just interest only. So once you've created this, now you can repeat it. Here's an example. I just wanted to get to this example because I feel like this makes sense. So we have a $200,000 line of credit. Let's say we walked in, we have a $200,000 line of credit. We purchased the property for $130,000. We've renovated the property. We've put, let's say, it needed a roof. We repainted it, and we put in some flooring. Okay? Now it's valued at $200,000. We're going to refi at $150,000. So what just happened here is, so it was valued at $200,000. We owe the bank 25% of that for our down payment. Right? So now our end loan is $150,000. I didn't use any money out of my pocket to purchase the property. Right? So, because my down payment was built into the appraised value. So in a nutshell, that's how I purchase properties on rental properties, at least. So with notes to consider, right? So ensure that you buy properties at a discounted rate. You're not going to go out there and you're buying it at market value because you want to, right? It needs to make sense. And it might take multiple offers. So, and knowing, again, I can't stress that enough, knowing your market, because you are the appraiser at that point. So now we're getting into a little bit more about local banks often have more flexibility and favorable terms. Banking is a lot of relationships. It's huge relationships. I can go from one bank that might not know my history. Yeah, my credit score's 780 and pretty decent at paying my stuff. Well, they can make it however they want. And if you create a good relationship, if you're personable, if you show them, you tell them what you're going to do, and you do what you're going to do, and it keeps working and it makes them money, they're just going to keep feeding it along. So business, banking is very important. And ensure your line of credit isn't maxed out for too long, right? So you're going to want to, again, kind of going back to that, you want to pay that back off. You're not just going to sit that out there and ride it out and then all of a sudden, oh, it's due, and now you're making interest-only payments on that due note. There's a lot of times, you know how I talked about an interest-only payment on a line of credit? Going back to that personally part of business is banking, I've had line of credits with 0 interest payments. It's possible, and it's not that hard. So you just need to have good bankers behind you. You know, and it might not be every deal, and the banks are going to be at different positions in different places at different times. So keeping in touch, talking with them, what's going on in their market, what do they see a need in their market. We bank with a lot of small banks that are in our area that are just small banks in our area. And if we can better the community, that just helps them create more business because it brings in more people, which then creates more business. So it's kind of a scratch your back, I'll scratch yours back scenario. Like I said, so back to here, there is risks, right? Variable interest rates. Depending on the term of it, they might just all of a sudden call it. They might call you and say, oh, yep, note's due. Or all of a sudden your interest rate goes from 6 on that line. Now all of a sudden you're halfway through that renovation and you get a letter in the mail saying it's now 9.5%. And you're like, holy buckets, well now my numbers are starting to go the other way. It doesn't fully work. So make sure you have that cushion. You know, don't stretch yourself out to that max point. Be able to get in, get out quickly. Get in, have your core group of people. You know, if you're not in construction, well, you got a buddy that is, right? Well, he's there. As soon as hey, I'm looking at this deal. Can you come look at it? Okay, we're going to do this. We need to try to get this done in 60 days. What can we do? You know, have that put together before you're going to go into there. Or have that relationship with that contractor, with those people put together before you're putting an offer in on a property, right? Know where you need to be. There was something I wanted to hit on. Now, earlier on when I first got into my first rental property, I didn't do a line of credit. I didn't know that was a thing yet. And that's where I go back to, this is an easy tool that I wish I knew and I wish I had. When I first got into it, it was bought it as cheap as I could on my personal side, because you can have X amount of loans. Currently it's 7. Yeah, 7 loans you can currently have underneath your personal name. That's when, after that, then we created a business because you could no longer have personal loans after 7. So at that point, I didn't really get scared about it anymore, but I started with 1, bought it on my personal, paid the down payment, and then pulled the equity back out later to pay myself back. Basically, I was my own little bank. I did that for years, for 3-4 years. Bought one, renovated it, put as much into it I could because it was the market I knew, right? Going back to 401k or putting money into this or putting money into this in your financial advisor, I didn't know that market. I don't know 401ks. That's not my cup of tea, but I can tell you that this deal is going to work and we can keep moving forward. So I feel like I'm backtracking a little bit, but with that, so earlier on is my wife. We did a lot together on the investment side. My wife handled all the books. She ran all that side of things, and slowly built that up to now. 2 years ago, hired Kristen as an office manager to start managing our rental properties. So in 2018, I bought our first rental property. At the moment now, we have 48 48 doors basically. So we've built that up kind of one after another, knowing your market, having those relationships with the banks, and having an interest to do it too. I mean, it's changing drastically. I mean, the real estate market in the last couple of years has kind of definitely changed a lot, but that is how I do deals.